Hope, Ilara had learned, was not a bright thing. It was a stubborn coal buried under ash, refusing to die even when grief tried to smother it. Pax spoke of honor, blood, and sacred law, yet law bent in the hands of men who feared hunger more than shame. Widows were praised in songs and traded in private rooms. Unborn heirs were blessed at altars and priced at treaty tables. By the longest night of midwinter, standing barefoot on frost-slick stone while strangers measured her belly with their eyes, Ilara understood the oldest truth of power. What cannot be bought will be renamed duty until it can be taken. The Midwinter Treaty. Moot had gathered every major alpha in the Northern Territories under the black rafters of Ironhold Hall. Torches smoked along the walls, pine resin and old fir thick in the air. Snowmelt dripped from cloaks onto flagstones. The dais at the center, carved from moonstone veined with silver, should have held oath bowls and peace wine. Instead, it held her. Eric Ashford's grip bruised her upper arm as he hauled her onto the raised slab. Her widow's black dress, hastily laced and still damp from where she had been dragged from the mourning chamber, clung to her knees. The fabric stretched over the curve of her pregnancy, impossible to hide, impossible now to protect. A wave of nausea rolled through her when the room's sense shifted toward interest, calculation, triumph. Eric lifted his voice, smooth as polished bone. By witness of gathered Pax and Moonlaw, House Ashford presents Ilara Ironhold as covenant bearer. Her issue will carry consolidated blood rights. Her guardianship transfers under sealed authority. The first row of alphas did not flinch. Some looked away. Some did not. Ilara forced breath into her lungs and raised her chin. My guardianship does not transfer. Eric squeezed harder, smile never changing. She is unwell with grief. You will forgive her confusion. He signaled to a clerk who stepped forward with a lacquered case. The clerk opened it and unfolded parchment stiff with fresh wax. Eric held the document high enough for the hall lamps to catch the seal. Red. Ironhold crest. This, he said, was signed by Garrick Ironhold before his death on the East Road. It grants House Ashford custodial authority over Ilara and the unborn heir in the event of his passing. The name struck like a blade slid between ribs. Garrick. Her mate, dead 9 days. Ambushed returning from the river fort. Buried without his sword, because she had wrapped both hands around it and refused to let go until dawn. She stared at the seal. The wolf crest was right, but the cut lines were wrong. Garrick carved deep. This bite was shallow, hesitant, made by someone copying a hand they did not carry in their bones. It is false, she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. The crest is forged. Garrick never signed away my body. He would have burned this hall first. Murmurs shivered through the moot. Eric's expression sharpened, then softened into pity so practiced it made her skin crawl. You hear her, he told the gathered wolves. Widow fever, delusion. She has not slept. A heavy-set alpha from Stonebank called from the side benches. If the seal stands, bids should open before moonrise. The roads are not safe after dark. Bids. The word landed in her like cold metal. Not alliance vows, not sanctuary terms. Bids. Eric inclined his head. House Ashford agrees. We will confine Lady Ilara for her safety until formal claiming. Ilara jerked against his hold. Do not call this safety. He leaned in so only she could hear. Keep your voice low and this can still be dignified. There is nothing dignified in selling a widow. His smile thinned. You were never the heir. You were the bridge. Bridges are crossed. He released her with a theatrical gentleness and gestured to 2 guards in Ashford colors. They took position at her shoulders, not touching yet, waiting for command like hounds at heel. Across the hall, she found familiar faces from Ironhold's old households. No one moved. Fear had done its work early. As the clerk carried the forged treaty around the circle for witness marks, Ilara measured exits the way Garrick had taught her when diplomacy turned feral. Doors, distance, weak points. Who watched her hands? Who watched her throat? Her pulse thudded unevenly. The child shifted. A hard, rolling pressure low in her abdomen that stole her breath for a beat. Not now, little heart. Stay with me. She tasted iron where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. Above the dais, the moon aperture in the ceiling showed a strip of night cloud and one sharp star. Moonrise would come quickly. Once bids opened, law would cloak theft in ceremony, and ceremony would make every witness complicit. Eric turned back to her as the last signature was laid. Take her below. The guards moved then, one at each arm. Ilara did not fight the first steps. She let her weight sag, let her head dip, let them believe shock had numbed her. They led her down a side stair spiraling beneath the hall into the old keep levels where vault rooms and archive cells lined narrow passages. Damp stone breathed cold against her face. Lantern light wavered over iron doors. At the third landing, she lifted her eyes and met the younger guard's gaze. He looked barely past first shift, jaw set too hard, wolf scent edged with fear rather than cruelty. My mate's signet is in the morning room, she whispered. Please. He flinched as if struck and looked away. Orders. They locked her in a counting chamber repurposed as holding cell, with one stool, one bucket, one barred slit no wider than her hand. The older guard slid the bolt and muttered, Do not make trouble. Moonrise is near. Their footsteps receded. Silence came down like a lid. Ilara stood still until her shaking eased enough for thought. The room smelled of old ledgers, lamp oil, wet limestone. On the shelf opposite the stool sat stacked account books bound in cracked leather, probably moved here during winter repairs and forgotten. Garrick used to joke that kingdoms died by arithmetic long before they died by claws. She went to the shelf, fingertips skimming spines, grain tithe, armory tallies, road tariffs. Her breathing hitched when she found a newer volume stamped Ashford Supply Office. She dragged it down and flipped pages by lantern glow filtering under the door. Columns of grain, iron, horse feed, then a folded half-sheet tucked between entries. Payment release, East Road detail, 6 men, no heraldry, deposit confirmed. Beneath it, a notation in Eric's angular hand, complete before second bell. Widow must remain viable. The edges of her vision darkened. She gripped the table until the wave passed. He had ordered it. Garrick's ambush was no raid gone wrong, no border accident, a contract, a timetable. For 3 breaths she could not move, grief and fury colliding so violently they turned to a strange calm. Then she folded the page small and slid it into the lining seam of her sleeve. Proof, first. Rage, later. She needed Garrick's signet. The true one bore old blood in the engraving from the day he cut his palm and pressed oath with her. If she could show that to a truth seal beside the forged crest, the lie would crack in public. But the signet was upstairs in the morning chamber behind a cedar screen, unless the old vault run still connected beneath it. She crossed to the back wall where mortar had split near floor level. As a child, she had hidden in these underways during feast days, running messages for kitchen women who paid in candied nuts. One crawl shaft linked the counting rooms to the disused coin vault, and from there to servant stairs behind the morning rooms. She dropped to her knees, pressed on the loose stone, and felt it shift. The scrape sounded loud as thunder. She froze. No footsteps. Again. Push. Drag. Breathe. The stone came free, opening a gap barely wide enough for shoulders. Cold air exhaled from darkness stale with dust and mineral water. Ilara lay on her side, one hand over her belly, and slid in inch by inch, stone rasping her hips. The child kicked once, sharp and indignant. I know, she whispered into black. I know. We are leaving. By the time she reached the coin vault, her palms were raw and her torn hem snagged on rusted brackets. She pulled free, swallowed a cry, and listened. Distantly above, hall drums marked the first moonrise call. Too late already. She climbed the servant stair, keeping to shadows, and emerged behind the morning chamber's cedar screen. Candles burned low around Garrick's beer cloth, now folded and set aside. His wolfskin cloak hung over a chair. On the small altar, beside the ash bowl, lay his signet ring wrapped in red thread. Her hands trembled when she took it. Dried brown marked the grooves of the iron-hulled wolf. Real. Heavy. His. Voices sounded in the corridor outside. Eric said move her at second bell. She is below. Check anyway. Alara slipped the ring onto a thong chain from the altar and looped it over her neck, then ducked back through the screen and down the stair before the door latch lifted. She ran bent double through the vault corridor, following memory and airflow toward the outer postern tunnel that opened beyond the keep wall where the old quarry met the pine line. Behind her, a shout rose, then another. By the second bell, she burst from the tunnel mouth into the border wild with snow needling her face and wind slicing through wet cloth. The night smelled of cedar, smoke, and distant wolves. She ran downhill over rock and frozen grass until her lungs burned and each step jarred pain up her spine. Branches whipped her cheeks. Twice she stumbled and caught herself on one hand, mud biting cold into her skin. She did not know where sanctuary waited. Only where it did not. Not Ironhold. Not any pack that had watched and stayed silent. The forest deepened. Moonlight broken into silver shards through black boughs. Her breaths came ragged now, each one dragging. The pressure in her abdomen tightened, then eased, then tightened again with warning rhythm. She slowed despite herself. One arm braced under her belly, the other clutching the chain at her throat where Garrick's ring knocked against her pulse. Far behind, hunting calls threaded the wind. Ahead, another scent cut across them, older and colder, edged with iron and storm. Predator. Alpha. Not Ashford. Her foot caught on an exposed root. She pitched forward, knees striking hard, palms sinking into snowmelt and leaf rot. For a heartbeat she stayed there, vision blurring, body refusing command. Then heavy steps approached through brush, swift and controlled, and a shadow dropped beside her just as she started to collapse fully into the dark. A gloved hand caught her under the ribs before her face hit stone. The grip was firm enough to stop her fall, and careful enough that not an ounce of pressure touched her belly, and that precision frightened her more than roughness would have. Rough men made mistakes. Trained men made plans. She twisted, breath shredding in her throat, and found a chest in dark leather, rain-slick fur at the collar, and a scar that cut pale across a square jaw as the stranger crouched into her collapsing weight. Snowmelt beaded on his lashes. His scent struck her first in full force now that he was close. Cedar smoke, cold iron, wolf, and something older that reminded her of storm air over exposed peaks. Not Ashford, not Ironhold, not any alpha she knew. He moved with battlefield economy, one knee in mud, one arm bracing her shoulders, the other clearing wet hair from her face so he could see her eyes. A second shape ghosted through the trees behind him, then a third, both stopping at a hand signal so sharp it might as well have been a blade. Sentries. Silent. Waiting for his decision. Alara clawed for distance anyway, palms skidding against frozen leaves. Pain flared up her wrist. The stranger let her move a single foot, then blocked her path with his body, broad and immovable, never striking, never grabbing for her throat. His gaze dropped to the chain at her neck, where Garrick's signet had slipped free of her dress and gleamed dully in moonlight. He stilled. The nearest sentry stepped closer, hood thrown back to reveal slate-gray eyes and a scarred brow. "Command," he murmured, voice low but urgent. "Ashford hunters cross the lower ravine. We should clear the border now." Border. The word snagged in her mind through the fog. She forced herself to look past them and finally saw what panic had hidden. 3 standing stones half buried in snow, each carved with the same crescent and claw sigil darkened by age. Duskwalker marks. Exile territory. Land every treaty map left blank by mutual convenience and old fear. Marcus Duskwalker's land. She had heard his name in war briefings long before she became Garrick's mate. The alpha who broke siege lines at Ridgefall with 30 wolves against 200. The commander who refused council commands and vanished after the Northern Succession fractures, taking loyal fighters into the border wild and answering no summons. Some called him traitor. Some called him the only honest blade left in the North. She had never expected to meet him kneeling in the mud while she shook apart. Another hunting call rose in the distance, closer this time. Her body answered with a hard cramp low in her abdomen that bent her double. A sound escaped her, small and involuntary, and the stranger's expression changed from tactical assessment to something flint-hard and immediate. "Easy," he said. His voice was deep, roughened at the edges, controlled. "Breathe with me." She hated that she obeyed. In for 4. Out for 4. Again. The sentry at his shoulder looked between them, unease sharpening his scent. "If she is who I think she is, keeping her here brings every pack to our gates." The stranger never looked away from Alara. "Then they can knock." Marcus. So it was him. Not rumor. Not memory. Flesh and breath and command that made armed wolves hesitate. Alara gathered what remained of her strength and shoved at his forearm. "Do not touch me." He withdrew at once, hands open, palms visible in a warrior's non-threat posture. Understood. His restraint landed harder than force. She pushed herself upright on trembling legs, one arm wrapped under her belly, and took a staggered step back. The forest swayed around her. Her right foot burned where skin had torn raw inside a soaked slipper. Blood scent threaded faintly under mud and pine. Marcus rose slowly, towering now, shoulders filling the narrow game path as if the woods had been built around him. Moonlight caught old claw marks along his throat and the ridge of a healed wound near his temple. His eyes were dark amber at first glance, but predator focus narrowed his pupils until they looked almost molten. "Name," he said. "Why?" "Because you crossed my stones with hunters on your trail, and my wolves are deciding whether this is an ambush." She swallowed against a mouth gone dry. Ilara Ironhold. The name moved through the centuries like a thrown spark. One cursed under his breath. The other stepped fully between her and the deeper trees. Marcus did not. He studied her, then the signet at her throat, then her torn hem and mud-smeared hands and the rounded line of pregnancy that no cloak could hide. When he spoke again, the command edge had shifted towards something more deliberate. "You can stand here and argue while Ashford closes distance," he said. "Or you can enter my boundary under my protection for one night and leave at dawn if you wish. Your choice. No one takes choice from you on my ground." Within minutes, she thought wildly, everything had narrowed to this. Trust a legendary war alpha or be dragged back to a treaty table before moonset. I am in the dark with a stranger, and Garrick is gone, and my child is pressing against my ribs like a second heartbeat. If I choose wrong now, there is no second mistake to make. Keep moving, keep thinking, keep one hand free, keep the proof hidden. Do not hand anyone the ledger page. Do not let grief make you simple. He says choice, but men with armies always say choice first. Yet he stepped back when I told him to. He did not touch my belly. He did not call me widow like a bargaining term. He looked at Garrick's ring and did not sneer. Breathe. Another breath. The child needs blood, not panic. Move toward shelter. Survive this hour. Decide the next one when it arrives. She drew in air that burned her chest. One night, she said. At dawn, I decide again. Marcus gave a single nod. At dawn, you decide again. He motioned, and the sentries broke formation reluctantly, one taking point, one rear. No one reached for her. No one tried to guide her by the elbow. She walked because she chose to, though every step shook. They followed a narrow ridge path cut between black pines and ice-slick stone. A creek roared somewhere below, swollen with thaw. Above, clouds thinned enough for moonlight to spill through in fractured silver bars. The hunting calls behind them faded, replaced by the quieter sounds of this territory. Distant wolves exchanging short-coded notes, the click of hidden watchposts signaling all clear, the hush of wind through old fur. By the time they crested the ridge, her legs were failing in earnest. Heat and cold chased each other beneath her skin. The pressure in her abdomen tightened once more, harder, then released, leaving her breathless. She reached for a trunk and missed. Marcus was there again, too fast, catching her around the shoulders as her knees gave way. This time, his hand brushed the inside of her wrist. The world snapped taut. Warmth surged up her arm in a bright, violent rush that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with recognition written deeper than reason. Her pulse stumbled, then slammed forward so hard she heard it in her ears. Low in her body, the child kicked with startling force, sharp enough to steal a cry from her throat. The scent of him flooded her senses, no longer merely wolf and smoke, but home and danger and an aching pull she could not name without betraying herself. Marcus went absolutely still, his breath cut off on a rough inhale. Amber bled into his irises, brightening toward molten gold as something ancient looked out through his gaze. His jaw tightened. The tendons in his neck stood out. His fingers flexed once against open air as if restraining claws from surfacing. A low, reverent sound escaped him, almost a fractured hum, the kind of sound a wolf made only at graves or births. The sentries stopped dead several strides away. Neither spoke. Ilara tried to wrench free and discovered her body had betrayed her twice. First by collapsing into his hold, then by leaning toward him as though pulled by an invisible thread anchored behind her ribs. Awareness prickled along her spine. Heat pulsed beneath her skin in waves that felt like panic and hunger and relief braided into one unbearable current. No, no, not this. Not now. Garrick's laugh flashed through her. Garrick's hands ink-stained from map work. Garrick bleeding out on winter roads she had never seen. Grief rose like a blade. How dare her blood answer another alpha while mourning marks still ringed her wrists? How dare safety smell like this man she met in mud and moonlight with hunters at her back? Marcus seemed to read every fragment of that war across her face. He took one deliberate step backward, then another, even as his gaze remained locked to hers like he was holding a line against a flood. Ilara, he said, and her name in his voice sounded like oath and wound together. Listen to me. She shook her head once, hard. Do not say it. I have to. His eyes were fully gold now, bright in the dark. Not a threat display, not dominance, recognition. His control looked expensive, the kind paid for in old scars and discipline that had kept him alive when lesser men burned. I know what this is, he said quietly, and I will not cage you. The words hit with devastating precision, because they were exactly the promise no one had offered her since Garrick died, not safety in exchange for obedience, not protection in exchange for ownership. Choice. Her throat tightened. You expect me to trust this? I expect nothing. His voice stayed steady despite the strain in it. You are grieving, you are hunted, you are carrying a child every power broker in the North wants to weaponize. If you walk away at dawn, I will put guards on your trail and never touch you again unless you ask. If you stay, it will be because you chose staying. Not because bond pull, not because fear, not because my rank. She stared at him, chest heaving, while the forest held its breath around them. The bond thrummed like a drawn bowstring, undeniable and unwelcome and startlingly gentle at the same time. It did not erase Garrick. It did not soothe the rage. It simply existed, vast and inconvenient and alive. Her hand moved without permission to the signet at her throat, thumb rubbing the dried grooves of old blood. Marcus's gaze followed the gesture, and for one suspended heartbeat, grief, fury, loyalty, and that impossible new pull stood between them like four blades crossing. Neither looked away. Marcus broke eye contact first, not in retreat, but in discipline, dropping his gaze to the ground between them as if giving her a place to stand that was not inside his gravity. "We keep moving," he said, voice rougher now. "Stormfront is turning, the tower is close." He did not reach for her again. He stepped to her left, far enough that she could have run if her legs had obeyed, near enough that if she slipped on the ice he could still catch her. The sentries resumed position in silence, but their attention kept cutting toward Marcus with the unsettled alertness of wolves who had just watched a law older than Command wake in their alpha's blood. Ilara took one step, then another. The bond threaded through her with every breath, a taut pull that made her pulse uneven and her temper raw. She hated it. She feared it. A part of her leaned toward it in pure animal relief, and that betrayal stung worst of all. The path narrowed into broken stone steps choked by moss and winter deadfall. At the summit, the abandoned watchtower rose from the pines like a snapped tooth, half its upper wall gone, roof patched with old slate and newer timber. Wolf wards had been carved into the archway, then scarred and recut by different hands over many seasons. Exile territory indeed. Nothing here was ornamental. Everything had survived on purpose. Inside, a low fire burned in a brazier near the inner wall. Bedrolls were stacked dry under oiled cloth. Water jars, a locked chest, a map table weighted with stones. Marcus gave 2 short orders to the sentries, and they vanished to perimeter posts without argument, leaving the chamber to the sound of wind scraping along stone. Ilara swayed as the adrenaline ebbed. The pain in her feet finally rose above everything else, sharp and throbbing, and she braced against the wall before her knees folded. "Sit," Marcus said. When she glared, he corrected himself. "Please, sit. I can bring what you need, and I will stay where you can see me." She lowered onto a folded blanket by the brazier, fingers white around Garrick's ring at her throat. Marcus moved with deliberate slowness, setting a shallow basin near her without kneeling close enough to crowd her. Steam curled from the water. He added a pinch of crushed herbs from a leather pouch, then held up a clean cloth. "May I touch your ankle?" he asked. "Or would you rather do it yourself?" She stared at him, waiting for the demand hidden inside the question. None came. "I can do it," she said. He passed the cloth handle first. "If the cuts keep grit, they will split deeper by morning." Her jaw tightened. She dipped the cloth and wiped mud from her instep. The first pass made her hiss. Skin had peeled raw at the heel, tiny stones embedded where the slipper had torn. She kept working because he was watching and she would not flinch in front of him again. After a minute, he set a small ceramic bowl beside her, then backed up a full pace. "Bone broth. Too salty for taste? Good for shock." The bowl was warm enough to steam in the cold room, though the brazier sat too far to have heated it that quickly. She looked up. "You warmed it with your hands." "My temperature runs hot when I shift near the surface." "Convenient." "Useful," he said, and for an instant the corner of his mouth almost moved. Not humor exactly. A brief easing in a face that had forgotten ease. She drank. The broth steadied her stomach and made the trembling in her fingers less violent. Marcus busied himself checking shutters and reinforcing the door bar, always announcing movement, always keeping lines of sight clear. It was meticulous to the point of strain, and she began to understand that his restraint was not effortless mercy. It was a choice he was remaking every few breaths. When she finished cleaning one foot, the second refused to cooperate. Her hands shook too hard. A cramp tightened low across her abdomen, then clenched harder, pulling a stunned breath from her lungs. She leaned forward, both palms under her belly. Marcus was beside her in 2 strides, then stopped himself half an arm's length away. "Tell me," he said. "Where?" "Low, tight, not labor." She swallowed. "Stress." "May I check your pulse?" She almost said no out of habit. Instead, she nodded once. His fingers settled lightly at her wrist, warm and steady. He counted, eyes on her face, not on her body. Fast, but regular. "Breathe with me again." The pain peaked and held. She shut her eyes and rode it, shoulders rigid. Marcus shifted down to one knee on the cold stone so she could lean back against his chest without twisting her abdomen. He braced one hand on the floor, the other hovering near her arm, not touching until she reached and caught his sleeve. "Here," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Stay here." "I am here." Wind hit the tower wall in a long moan. The brazier hissed. Somewhere outside, a sentinel gave a 2-note signal and received an answer farther downslope. Inside that fragile pocket of warmth and stone, Marcus remained absolutely still except for his breathing, giving her a rhythm to follow while the cramp loosened by slow degrees. She did not realize when exhaustion took her until her forehead drifted to his shoulder and stayed there. I should move. I should stand up and lock this door myself, and keep the blade in my lap and sleep with one eye open like every widow story ever told in this cursed hall of Pax. I should remember the treaty table and Eric's hand on my arm and Garrick's name used like a coin. I should remember that bonds can be weaponized, that tenderness can be staged, that men who lead armies rarely do anything without cost. But I am so tired I can hear my bones. I am so tired I cannot hold anger and fear and grief at once without dropping one, and fear is the only one I cannot afford to drop. "Still?" he asked. Every time, he asked, he stayed on stone so I could breathe. He did not call my child leverage. He did not call me a prize. Dawn is not a promise, but it is a direction. Survive this night. Choose again at light. When she woke, gray pre-dawn had begun to thin the darkness in the tower slits. Marcus was still kneeling where she had left him, back against the wall now. One leg gone numb by the way he shifted weight with careful slowness so he would not jostle her. A small carving knife lay in his hand. At his boot, wood shavings curled around a rough figure he had been shaping from ashwood. A little wolf with oversized paws and a stubbornly lifted head. He noticed her eyes open and set the knife down at once. "Pain?" "Less." He nodded, then held up the carving, awkward suddenly in a way that made him look years younger. "I had wood. I made a poor attempt at a guard wolf for the cradle. If there is a cradle." Alara looked at the little figure, at the blunt ears and careful paws carved by hands built for battle, and something tight behind her ribs eased a fraction. "It is not poor," she said quietly. "It looks like it plans to bite anyone who gets close." "Then it is accurate." By mid-morning, clouds had thickened, and a hard sleet began to strike the tower stones. Marcus had posted additional watchers, and the room filled with the muted traffic of an organized holdfast under threat. Boots at the threshold, coded knocks, quick reports delivered and dismissed. Ilara remained by the brazier, wrapped in a spare cloak that smelled of smoke and cedar. The ledger page stayed hidden in her sleeve. Garrick's signet rested warm against her skin. The calm broke at dusk. Bootsteps pounded up the tower stair in numbers too large for a routine patrol. The door opened to a flood of cold air and armed wolves in mixed leathers, at least 20 by scent and silhouette, some bearing Duskwalker marks, others with neutral pack braids cut into their hair. Their spokesman, a broad-shouldered veteran named Torin, whom Alara remembered from old campaign briefings, did not bow. Scouts confirmed Ashford riders massing at South Cut, Torin said. Stonebank and Red Hollow are sending observers. They demand immediate surrender of the widow to neutral custody until the next moot. If we refuse, they call it abduction and declare censure. Alara stood carefully, spine against the wall for balance. Torin's gaze flicked to her belly and back to Marcus with open calculation. This is not personal command, Torin continued. It is arithmetic. One woman for border stability. The words hit like a slap colder than sleet. Not personal. Arithmetic. The same logic, polished in different mouths. Marcus stepped forward until he stood between Torin and Alara, broad back filling her line of sight. His voice dropped, quiet enough that every wolf in the room had to lean into it. You just called my guest a number. Torin held his ground. I called the situation what it is. She carries contested bloodline rights. Packs will burn over this. They will burn faster if we hand her over like freight. A younger fighter at the rear muttered, not quite under his breath. Bond or not, we did not sign up to die for an Ironhold womb. Claws slid free in one clean metallic whisper. Marcus's hand had changed before Alara saw him move, knuckles lengthening, black talons catching firelight. Say that again, he said. Silence crushed the room. Torin lifted both palms, uneasy now. No insult meant. Insult was delivered. Marcus turned his head slightly, enough for his profile to show the wolves behind him, the predator surfacing under his skin. Hear me under old warrior law. Any challenge to her person passes through me first, not through rumor, not through council parchment, not through convenient fear, through me. Murmurs rippled. Warrior law predated the modern treaty councils. Invoking it inside a command hold was a non-trivial escalation, binding in blood for any wolf who accepted Duskwalker authority. Torin knew it. So did everyone else. He tried one last angle. You would risk civil fracture for her? Marcus answered without hesitation. I would risk fracture to prevent sanctioned theft. There is a difference. He turned then, meeting Alara's gaze over his shoulder. Do you consent to remain under my protection tonight, while we settle this before witnesses? She felt every eye in the room swing toward her, waiting to see whether she would be spoken for or speak. I remain, she said. Her voice carried more steadily than she felt. By my choice. Marcus faced the assembled wolves again. Circle. Outside. Moonlit ground. They moved to the clearing below the tower where 3 standing stones marked Duskwalker boundary. Sleet had thinned to freezing rain, and the moon appeared in ragged intervals through cloud, silvering wet fur and blade edges. Wolves formed a broad ring, weapons sheathed but visible. Marcus stood at the center beside Alara, not touching, close enough that his heat cut the wind. Repeat after me, he ordered. Torin spoke first, jaw tight. The others followed. No one speaks Garrick Ironhold's name with contempt. The ring echoed it, some voices reluctant, some clear. No one touches Alara Ironhold without her consent. Again, the oath ran around the circle, gaining force as it traveled. Any threat against her child is treason against my command. This line landed hardest. 2 wolves hesitated. Marcus's gaze found them, feral and unblinking, and they spoke the words. The moon slid free of cloud just as the final vow closed. The standing stones caught the light and seemed to pale from within. Old runes waking faintly along their carved seams in acknowledgement of sworn law. Not magic enough to dazzle, enough to bind. Marcus drew one claw across his palm and let a single line of blood fall to the earth, sealing command liability in the oldest way. Torin cursed softly, then mirrored the act. One by one the rest followed, each drop darkening the wet ground until the circle held. When it ended, Marcus addressed them without raising his voice. Any wolf who cannot keep this oath can leave my territory now with no pursuit and no dishonor. Any wolf who stays will keep it. There is no middle. No one moved. Back in the tower, long after the ring dispersed to posts, Ilara stood by the brazier and watched Marcus clean rain from his claws with methodical care. He looked tired for the first time, fatigue cutting shadows beneath his eyes, but there was no regret in him. "You could have traded me for time," she said. "Yes." "You did not." "No." She studied him, this feared exile alpha who had just wagered his command against custom rather than let her become policy again. The bond still thrummed, complicated and unresolved. Her grief remained a live wire. Her mistrust did not vanish. Yet the world had shifted by measurable degrees. She took Garrick's signet from her throat, held it in her palm for a long moment, then put it back where it belonged and lifted her eyes to Marcus. "At dawn," she said, "I will decide again." His expression eased, just slightly. "At dawn," he agreed. This time, when the wind shook the tower, she did not reach for a weapon first. The knock came again, sharper this time, and Marcus's head turned toward the stair before the third strike sounded. He crossed the room in 2 strides, lifted the bar, and pulled the door open to a Scout drenched to the bone, snow crusting her braid and shoulders. "Rider intercepted at the north cut," she said, chest heaving. "Ashford courier." He bit through his own tongue before questioning. She held out a leather tube sealed in black wax. Even from across the brazier, Ilara recognized Eric's sign. A wolf crest over crossed tally marks, the private stamp he used on procurement orders when he did not want council scribes reading too closely. Her stomach tightened. Marcus did not break the seal immediately. He looked at Ilara first. "Do you want this read now?" "Yes." He cracked the wax, unfolded the parchment, and scanned in silence long enough for the fire to settle into a dry hiss. When he spoke, his voice had gone flat, in the way men used when rage was being placed under lock. "He has circulated a revised treaty article to every attending pack." Ilara stood. "Say it." Marcus lifted the page so she could see. The script was Eric's, formal and immaculate. In recognition of succession instability and to preserve border peace, any Alpha securing custody of widow Ilara Ironhold and her unborn issue shall hold provisional claim to Ironhold trade corridors and bloodline regency rights pending full-term verification. Underneath, 3 witness marks had already been laid: Stonebank, Red Hollow, and Greyfen. The room tilted for one disorienting beat. Not because she was surprised by Eric's cruelty, but because he had refined it into governance. He was not just selling her now. He was creating a legal market where her capture became statecraft. Marcus kept reading. "Any harboring party refusing neutral transfer may be deemed in unlawful possession of treaty property and subject to corrective force." Property. The same word hidden in cleaner language. The Scout shifted her weight, avoiding Ilara's eyes. "There is more, Command. Road Talk says Ashford is claiming you orchestrated Garrick Ironhold's ambush to trigger a mate bond with his widow and seize Ironhold through her." Marcus's jaw hardened. "And they believe it." "Enough do. It gives neutral packs an excuse to move troops without admitting they want the corridors." Ilara reached for the map table to steady herself, fingers flattening over cold wood. Garrick's death, her grief, the bond she had not invited. All of it had been turned into a single narrative she could not disprove by denial alone. Eric had understood the core mechanism of power in their world. If you could name violence as order, respectable wolves would defend it. She heard herself ask, "What does he want at the end of this?" Marcus answered without looking away from the parchment. "High Regency. He manufactures collapse, then offers himself as the only broker who can stop it." The scout dug into her satchel and produced a second folded slip, taken from the same courier's lining. Marcus opened it, then handed it directly to Alara. It was shorter, written in Eric's private hand to an unnamed recipient. Ensure public verification at next moot. Widow must drink from common peace cup before witness circle. If she fails, blame Duskwalker contamination and demand war vote. Poison, then frame Marcus for it. Efficient, layered, non-trivial enough to pass as procedure until someone died on polished stone. Alara closed her fingers around the note so tightly the parchment edges bit her palm. He is not improvising. He planned this before midwinter. Marcus inclined his head once. He planned it before Garrick left the river fort. Silence pressed in. Outside, wind dragged across the tower face with a sound like cloth tearing. Marcus turned to the scout. Double perimeter. No food, tonic, or medicine enters without 2 testers and chain of custody. Any messenger stays outside boundary stones until I say otherwise. She thumped a fist to her chest and vanished down the stair. When the door shut, Alara remained where she was, pulse beating hard behind her eyes. The bond tugged at her awareness, not as comfort exactly, but as a constant line that sharpened whenever Marcus moved closer. She resented needing that line. She resented how steady it felt. He set the parchments in a neat stack and weighted them with a dagger hilt. You should eat. She gave a short laugh that held no amusement. I am apparently a corridor policy and a peace cup casualty. Broth feels ambitious. You need strength for what comes next. What comes next, she said, is that he drags me into another hall and calls it lawful. Marcus studied her face, reading the places fear had turned to anger and anger had become strategy. Only if you let him set the terms. A long moment passed. Then Alara spoke, quieter. If I walk into that moot, I walk under my own name. No concealment, no proxy testimony. He does not get to narrate me while I hide behind your command. I know. The words landed with unexpected force because there was no argument in them. No protective decree disguised as care. She turned from him and stared into the brazier until sparks blurred. I am so tired of being moved by other hands. I am so tired of deciding between bad outcomes and calling it agency. I miss Garrick until my bones ache, and still this bond hums when Marcus is near, infuriating and tender and real. I can grieve and still choose. I can love what was and fight for what remains. That has to be true, or Eric has already won. He wants panic, silence, and procedural obedience. I have proof in my sleeve, a signet at my throat, and a voice he keeps trying to medically erase. I will not be erased. Not in his hall. Not in mine. Not while my child learns my heartbeat from the inside. When she turned back, Marcus had not moved. He was waiting, giving her the space to arrive at her own command. We need every copy of this revised article, she said. Not rumor. Originals with witness marks. I can seize couriers. I cannot seize what is already read aloud. Then we document the fraud chain. Your scouts. My ledger page. The forged guardianship seal. If he wants legality, we drown him in his own paperwork. A rough, almost grim approval crossed Marcus's face. That is exactly what he fears. By the following afternoon, the storm had settled into hard gray rain that turned the tower steps slick as bone. Reports came in a relentless trickle. Stonebank had moved 40 wolves to the lower pass under the pretext of escort duty. Red Hollow demanded that Alara appear before a neutral healer for pregnancy verification before any legal challenge could be heard. Greyfen requested Marcus present himself in irons if he wished to contest abduction claims. Each message carried the same underlying threat: comply and be controlled, refuse, and be declared outlaw. Pressure inside the tower changed with the weather. Fewer jokes at watch change, more hands resting near knife hilts when Alara crossed the chamber. Torin kept his oath, but his eyes tracked every new report like tally marks marching toward famine. Near dusk, Alara found Marcus at the archway overlooking the western ravine, rain silvering his hair at the temples. He had one hand braced against stone, the other flexing open and closed as if fighting restlessness through muscle alone. She stepped beside him, close enough to share warmth, far enough to leave choice intact. You have not slept. You have not either. Deflection is unattractive on you. That earned the faintest exhale that might have been a laugh. Noted. Below, mist climbed through pines in long pale ribbons. Somewhere in the valley, a wolf called once, then went quiet. Alara said, "If they force verification, they will try to isolate me from you and from any witness who knows Ironhold law. Yes? And if they cannot isolate me, they will provoke you into public violence to validate the rumor." Marcus turned then, rain tracking down the scar at his jaw. "Yes." She held his gaze. "Can you stay controlled if Eric spits Garrick's name at you in that hall?" A dangerous question, a necessary one. Marcus answered after a beat. "I can stay controlled if you ask it of me. I cannot promise restraint if he puts hands on you." The truth of it should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, a low thrum built in her chest, not from fear, but from being defended as a person rather than managed as an asset. "Then we build the hearing so he never gets close," she said. "Distance protocols, blade checks, witness order fixed in writing." Marcus nodded. Agreed. Rain intensified. She shivered once, involuntary. Marcus slipped off his cloak and held it out. "May I?" She accepted, and his knuckles brushed hers, warm despite the cold. The bond tightened. A bright thread pulled taut between sternum and spine. She closed her eyes for a breath, then opened them to find him watching her with that same disciplined hunger he kept refusing to weaponize. "I still do not know what to do with this," she admitted. "You do not have to decide tonight." "Everything is deciding tonight." "Not this," he said softly. "This can wait until you are safe enough to choose without a knife at your back." The generosity in that nearly undid her. Night fell early under cloud. Torches were lit along the lower path, then doused again when scouts reported movement beyond the stones. At full dark, a white flag party appeared at the boundary. 3 wolves from Red Hollow and 1 from Stonebank. Unarmed by outward inspection, carrying a lacquered box and a stamped writ tube. Torin met them outside with 6 guards while Marcus and Alara watched from the archway. The Red Hollow envoy lifted the writ. "Under Neutral Health Accord, we deliver maternal stabilizing draft for widow Alara Ironhold, witnessed and sealed. Refusal will be recorded as obstruction." Marcus did not look at the box. Set it on the 3rd stone and step back. The envoy complied with visible offense. Marcus signaled a tester forward, an older she-wolf named Nessa, whose nose was famous from border campaigns. She uncorked the vial, inhaled, and went rigid. "Bitter seed under honey," Nessa said, "masked with clove, slow organ failure if ingested. Hours, not minutes." The envoy's composure broke. "That is a lie." Nessa tipped a drop onto a silver pin. The metal blackened at once. Torin's snarl rolled across the clearing. "You brought poison under a white flag." Stonebank's representative backed away first. Red Hollow reached for his writ tube as if paperwork could shield him from what he had carried. Marcus's voice cracked through the rain. "Detain them. Alive. I want names." The clearing exploded into motion. Guards surged. One envoy bolted downslope. Another drew a hidden blade too late and was slammed into mud by Torin. The third dropped to his knees, hands over his head, shouting that he was only a courier. Inside the same heartbeat, a horn blast split the night from the south ridge. Not one of Marcus's signals. Then another, closer, followed by the thud of grapples biting stone below the rear wall. Shadows rose where no shadows should be, cloaked wolves hauling themselves up the rain-slick face in coordinated lines. Diversion at the front, strike at the blind side. "Ashford assault team!" Torin roared. "Rear breach!" Marcus moved before the words finished, claws out, command rolling from him like thunder. "North stair lock. Ilara with me." He caught Ilara's forearm and they ran for the inner passage as impact hammered the lower gate. Wood splintered. Wolves shouted. Steel rang on stone. Smoke began threading under the stair door, acrid and fast. Halfway down the corridor, a figure stepped from a side alcove in Duskwalker leathers with his hood up and a crossbow already raised. Not enemy colors. One of Marcus's own. Traitor. Ilara saw the bolt leave the string, saw Marcus twist toward her, saw the dart shear past his shoulder and strike her high in the arm with a hot, numbing sting before clattering to the floor. The traitor fled into smoke. Marcus ripped the dart free and stared at the black residue on its tip, fury and fear colliding in his eyes. "Wolfsbane tincture," he said, voice gone deadly calm. Her fingers were already losing sensation. The corridor swayed, torchlight smearing gold and black, while below them the rear door gave way with a crash that shook dust from the ceiling stones. Marcus hauled her against him, shouting for Nessa as boots thundered up the stair toward them. Boots hammered the stair, and Marcus dragged Ilara into the narrow armory alcove just as Nessa skidded around the corner with 2 guards and a satchel of vials clattering at her hip. The old healer took one look at Ilara's slackening fingers and the dark smear on the dart tip in Marcus's hand, then swore with surgical precision. "Not pure wolfsbane," Nessa said, already tying a strip of cloth above Ilara's shoulder. "Cut with dreamroot and poppy milk. They wanted her weak, not dead. Hold still." Below them, the rear hall exploded in noise as the breach widened. Smoke rolled under the lintel in greasy ribbons. Torn's voice carried up from the lower landing, issuing kill zone commands, followed by the unmistakable crack of steel striking stone. Marcus braced Ilara against the wall. "Can you stand?" "For now." Nessa plunged a needle into the muscle below the wound and pushed in a bitter, clear extract. Fire raced up Ilara's neck, then settled into a brutal throb behind her eyes. "You have maybe an hour before the sedative drags you under," Nessa said. "Maybe less with stress. Keep her moving, keep her awake. If she loses consciousness, her pressure will drop." A horn sounded outside the tower. Not the assault call this time, but a long ceremonial note that did not belong on a battlefield. Marcus's stare hardened. He wants witnesses. They hit the lower corridor in a wedge, Torin in front, Marcus at Ilara's side, Nessa behind with one hand hovering near Ilara's spine whenever the floor pitched under her. The western door had been smashed inward. Rain blew through the gap and turned the threshold to black mud. Beyond the boundary stones, torchlight multiplied through the trees as wolves from 3 packs formed a rough crescent around the clearing, drawn by horn and promise of lawful spectacle. At the center stood Eric Ashford beneath a white banner, his cloak immaculate despite the weather, a lacquered treaty chest open on a folding table at his elbow. 2 neutral elders flanked him, and behind them waited 6 armed guards wearing no insignia at all. Eric's smile did not reach his eyes when he saw Ilara upright. "Cousin, I was told you were unstable." Marcus stepped forward, but Ilara caught his wrist. If he spoke first, Eric would make this about male dominance and abduction. If she spoke first, he would have to answer her name. "I am coherent enough to hear you trespass," she said, each word careful against the drag of poison. "State your claim in front of witnesses." Eric spread his hands toward the gathered wolves. "By revised treaty article and neutral accord, I demand immediate transfer of widow Ilara Ironhold into council custody for verification and protection. Marcus Duskwalker is in unlawful possession of treaty property and is ordered to stand down." A ripple ran through the crescent. Property again, wrapped in civic language. Alara felt the sedative tug at the edges of her vision and forced herself to focus on concrete detail. The blackened silver pin Nessa still held, the writ tube by Eric's hand, the courier seal on the table, the faint notch in Eric's left thumbnail from years of biting it when he lied. The child shifted hard, a blunt heel against her ribs, and she drew breath around the pain. I am not fainting in front of him. I am not becoming the story he wrote for me. Stay vertical. Name facts. Make them repeatable. If I rage, he wins. If I plead, he wins. If I disappear behind Marcus, he wins slower and still wins. I have paper, ring, law. I have a body that hurts and a mind that is clear enough to cut with. He wants me drugged, passive, grateful for procedure. I am none of those things. I am a widow of Ironhold. I am carrying an heir he priced in soldiers. I choose the ground now. I choose the order of voices. I choose what becomes record and what becomes ash. She stepped out from Marcus's shadow and into the rain. I invoke the Ironhold Widow's challenge. Even the wind seemed to pause. One of the neutral elders frowned. That right is obsolete. It is older than your council, Alara said. Still binding where bloodline claims are contested over a widow's body and unborn heir. Every claimant testifies under Moonstone truth. Every document is blood verified. Any wolf who refuses forfeits claim. Torin turned sharply toward the assembled packs. She is correct under pre-council law. Eric's composure thinned. You are in no condition to invoke anything. Alara lifted her wounded arm, blood tracking down to her wrist. You sent poison under a white flag an hour ago. Condition established. By the time the moon broke through a seam in the clouds, the clearing had become a court. The folding treaty table was dragged between the standing stones. Nessa set the tainted vial and blackened pin on its surface as physical exhibits. Torin produced the captured envoys, wrists bound, and forced them to kneel where every pack could see their faces. A second runner arrived from the lower pass with satchels seized from Ashford riders. Inside were duplicate treaty articles bearing Eric's private seal and pre-written custody warrants dated 2 days before the supposed neutral hearing. Eric tried to object on procedural grounds. Ilara spoke over him. First evidence. She pulled the folded ledger page from the seam of her sleeve, now stiff with damp, and laid it flat on Moonstone. Ashford payment release for East Road detail. 6 men. No heraldry. Completion deadline tied to my mate's route. Murmurs deepened into growls. Second evidence. From inside Garrick's signet chain, she drew a small iron token, nicked along one edge, branded with the contractor mark used by the mercenary cell that had vanished after the ambush. Taken from the vault tunnel cache where your men stored courier satchels. Same brand appears on the dead attacker found at River Ford after Garrick fell. Marcus's gaze snapped to the token, then to her. He had not known she carried that piece. She saw shock, then fierce respect, then calculation as he grasped what she had preserved while running for her life. Third evidence, she said. Your own note ordering I drink from the common peace cup before witness circle, with intent to frame Duskwalker contamination. Nessa lifted the note high and read it aloud. No flourish, just words and attribution. The weather did the rest, rain striking parchment like a slow drumbeat. Eric leaned in, voice sharp. Fabrications, grief and bond sickness. She has been manipulated. Blood truth then, Alara said. She set Garrick's signet on the moonstone and, with a small controlled motion, struck it once against the table edge. The ring cracked along an old stress line, splitting into 2 uneven halves. She threaded one half back onto her chain and placed the other on the seal beside Eric's forged guardianship document. Compare cut depth, she said to the elder nearest the stone. Compare hand angle. Compare blood groove. One is my mate's mark. One is imitation. The elder pricked his thumb and touched both seals in turn. The moonstone glowed under Garrick's half, then stayed dull under the forged crest. The crescent of wolves erupted into argument. Eric slammed his palm on the table. This circus proves nothing. She remains under Ashford guardianship until a full council— No. Alara's voice carried clean despite the numb heaviness pulling at her limbs. I claim bloodline headship now. She cut her own thumb with the ceremonial blade Torin offered hilt first, then pressed blood to the standing stone rune and spoke the inheritance words Garrick had once taught her in case war took him first. The carving answered with a low silver flare that traveled from stone to stone, waking old lines in the ground like roots catching fire under frost. Pack inheritance recognized. Not theory. Not sentiment. Law. Eric went very still. When he spoke again, the mask had dropped. You think a dead husband's ring and a few old words make you sovereign. I know they make me legal guardian of my child and head of House Ironhold, Alara said, which voids every custody article you filed. For one suspended beat, he looked around the clearing and understood he was losing control of narrative, and with it the regency he had built his crimes to seize. Then he moved. He lunged across the table, drawing a narrow blade from inside his sleeve, aiming not for her belly but for her throat, where one clean strike could silence testimony and turn chaos back into masculine arbitration. Alara pivoted on the slick stone exactly as Garrick had drilled her years ago. Grief turned to muscle memory. Eric's blade passed her shoulder. She drove her ceremonial knife downward into his forearm and pinned him to the treaty table through cloak and flesh. The blade bit wood with a hard crack. Eric screamed and struck at her with his free hand. Marcus was already there, disarming the nearest two Ashford guards in a blur of claws and elbows, then kicking the third back into mud before he could clear steel. Torin's wolves closed ranks, weapons out, forcing the neutral packs to hold position or declare themselves openly. Alara leaned over Eric while he thrashed against the pinned arm. Rain ran down both their faces. Palm on the truth seal, she said. He spat at her boots. You were always currency. She caught his wrist, slammed his hand onto Moonstone, and held it there with both hands despite the poison shaking her grip. I was never yours to spend. The seal ignited. Light rose from stone in a vertical sheet, then fractured into sound. Eric's own voice, unmistakable, recorded through oath resonance from prior private sealings. Order the East Road detail. Keep the widow viable. Sell to whichever pack pays in soldiers. If she resists, sedate and certify. No one spoke when the projection ended. The clearing had gone silent in the stunned way that follows public truth no one can politely reinterpret. Alara released him, tore the Ashford crest brooch from his cloak, and threw it into the mud. Eric Ashford, by witnessed blood truth and attempted murder under challenge law, I strip your crest and sentence you to blood exile from Ironhold territories. Eric ripped his arm free with a ragged shout, leaving the knife behind. He staggered once, then charged her again with murder in his face and no pretense left. Marcus intercepted him mid-stride. The two men hit the edge of the table, splintering one leg. Eric clawed for Marcus's throat. Marcus caught him by the jaw and the back of the neck, eyes gone feral amber, waiting one heartbeat while looking past Eric at Alara. He did not move until she gave a single, steady nod. The sound of Eric's neck breaking was brief and final. Marcus let the body drop to the churned earth and stepped back, chest heaving once before control settled over him again like armor. No cheer followed. Just rain, hard and clean, washing blood from Moonstone and carrying the last of Eric's ambition into the dark soil. Alara swayed. Nessa reached her first, catching her elbows as the sedative finally crashed through the narrow corridor of will she had held open. Stay with me, Nessa said. Alara kept her eyes on the gathered packs as Torin called the legal close in a ringing voice. Challenge resolved, claimant dead, forged treaty void, sentence entered. One by one in full witness, The neutral elders bowed their heads toward her and repeated the judgment for record. Only then did she let her weight sink into Marcus's waiting arms, still awake, still conscious long enough to hear him at her ear, raw with relief and oath. "No cages," he said. "No bargains." "No cages," Alara whispered back, though the words scraped through a throat raw from rain and smoke. "No bargains. Only chosen." Nessa got her into the tower infirmary before the sedative could drag her under fully. Heat stones were packed along Alara's spine, the dart wound flushed until the water ran clear, and a bitter antidote was poured between her lips in careful increments, while Marcus stood at the bedside with his hands braced on the table edge, as if he could hold the world steady by force. "The child is strong," Nessa said at last, palms spread over Alara's abdomen, eyes closed to read pulse and movement with healer focus. "Her pressure is climbing back. She will sleep, then shake, then burn off the rest. No one disturbs her unless I call." Marcus did not argue. He only nodded once, then looked to Torrin in the doorway. "Report." Torrin's face was rain-scrubbed and grim. "All 3 envoys are contained. They gave names after seeing the poison vial tested twice. Red Hollow's envoy admitted the draft came from Ashford stores, delivered with your traitor's pass sigil." He set a leather packet on the table. "Recovered from the rear passage. The shooter was Joran Hale. He was the one who called her an iron-holed womb in the tower. He ran to the south gully, but the Standing Stone ward caught his scent. We took him alive." Alara opened her eyes fully at that. "Alive." Torrin met her gaze without flinching this time. "Alive for testimony, as you ordered at the challenge." A primary knot of tension in her chest loosened. No missing thread. No violence without record. By dawn, when the rain thinned to mist, the neutral elders had signed the challenge transcript in triplicate. Forged guardianship null, revised custody article void, attempted poisoning and attempted murder entered as Ashford crimes. The ledger page, assassin token, poison vial, blackened silver pin, and Eric's private note were sealed into an evidence coffer under 3 pack marks and placed in the Moon Archive vault. Garrick's broken signet half remained at Alara's throat. The other half was set into the same coffer by her own hand. Torrin returned once more at midday, quieter than she had ever heard him. "The young Ashford guard from your first confinement came in under white cloth. Name is Kale. He confirms Eric ordered the morning chamber searched for Garrick's ring before the midwinter moot. He thought you would be killed for resisting and could not carry it any more." Torrin paused. "I should have challenged sooner. I saw the arithmetic and pretended it was wisdom." Alara held his gaze. "Then stop pretending now." He bowed his head. "I have." By the second night after the challenge, moonlight had washed the storm from the stones, and Alara walked with Marcus up the temple path above the tower. No guards followed past the outer arch. Torrin stationed watchers downslope and looked away on purpose when they entered, honoring privacy as law, not favor. The Moon Temple was small, built before councils and crowns, all white stone and soot-dark alcoves where oath fire burned in shallow bowls. The air held cedar, old ash, and the metallic sweetness of truth seal dust. Alara wore widow black still, but without the torn hem. Marcus had changed into plain dark leathers, no crest, no war mantle, only runes along his forearms glowing faintly as his control tightened and released with each breath. He stopped 3 paces from her. "If you want this delayed, I accept delay." "I do not." He inclined his head, then asked the first time, formal and clear. "Do you consent to stand in bond right with me, witnessed only by Oathfire and Moon?" "Yes." He stepped closer, but not enough to touch. His eyes held amber and restraint, reverent and fierce in equal measure. "Second, do you consent for me to mark you at the throat, knowing it binds scent, strength, and claim before law?" Ilara let her fingers close around Garrick's ring half, then released it. Yes. A silence followed that did not feel empty. It felt exact. Third, Marcus said, voice rough now. Do you consent to mark me in return? Equal bond, equal claim. No hierarchy in the wound. Her pulse kicked hard. Not fear now, but recognition accepted at last. Yes. Mine and yours. Both ways. He exhaled like a man stepping off a cliff by choice. When he reached for her, his hands framed her face first, thumbs warm at her jaw, giving her one final chance to turn away. She did not. She rose onto her toes, baring the junction of neck and shoulder. His bite landed with controlled force, sharp pain that flashed white through her nerves. She gasped, fingers gripping his wrists, and for a heartbeat, grief, terror, and rage all surged together, as if the wound had opened every sealed chamber in her at once. Then the pain changed. Heat poured from the mark in concentric waves, not erasing what she had lost, but weaving through it, finding space beside old love rather than over it. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened. Breath returned fuller. Bond current struck. She felt Marcus's discipline like iron pillars, his exile nights, his refusal to cage her even when instinct and law gave him easy pretexts. She felt his vow to protect the memory of Garrick, not compete with it. She felt his fear when the dart hit her, raw and unhidden. Under all of it ran a steadier pulse, ancient and startlingly gentle. Mate. He lifted his mouth from her skin and pressed his forehead to hers, shaking once. Mine, he whispered, as if the word were a prayer rather than possession. Ilara touched the fresh mark at her throat, felt it throb in rhythm with her heart, then slid her hand to his shoulder. Yours, she answered. Now hold still. He gave a breath that might have been a laugh under strain and turned enough to bare the muscle where neck met shoulder. His runes brightened to molten lines beneath skin. She bit. His body went rigid at the first sting, then softened into her as her mark sealed. The taste of salt and heat filled her mouth. His hand splayed at her back, not pressing, only anchoring. When she released him, his eyes had gone fully feral, but his voice remained steady. Mate. The word broke something open and mended it in the same instant. Gold light kindled at her mark, answered at his, then arced between their chests in a visible current, thin at first, then strong as braided wire. It did not flare wild, it settled. Oathfire bent toward it, flames leaning as if to witness. The temple stones hummed with old magic recognizing completed symmetry, chosen, mutual, sealed. Ilara swayed as the current finished knitting. Marcus caught her and drew her against him, careful of her belly, careful of everything. They stood that way for a long time, breathing each other in while the bond quieted from storm to steady tide. No cages, she murmured into his throat. No bargains, he answered. Chosen. Now and every moon after. 9 days later, the High Hall at Ironhold opened under full witness for treaty rewrite. Ilara took the central dais as bloodline head, black gown traded for iron-gray wool with house sigils newly recarved to remove Ashford quartering. Marcus stood at her right, half a step behind by his own insistence. When murmurs rose, he cut through them with one sentence that reset the room's hierarchy. Her authority stands whether or not I draw breath. Record that first. It was recorded first. Clause by clause, Ilara read the new law aloud. Bloodline barter banned under treason penalty. Forced mating contracts void. Maternal coercion criminalized. Custody rights vested in the parent unless proven unfit by evidence not rank. She established the Widows' Council seat with binding veto over succession claims involving pregnant mates and minor heirs. Nessa was appointed interim chair until elections. Torin was sworn as Ironhold Marshal after kneeling to Ilara and taking oath to enforce consent law across mixed-pack borders. Joran Hale was tried before Moonstone, confronted with courier records and envoy testimony. He confessed to accepting Ashford coin and was sentenced to permanent exile beyond the Eastern Cairns, marked and unarmed, alive. Cale, the young guard who had once looked away at her plea, testified to the forged seal chain and was granted clemency under cooperation statute, then assigned to archive duty where his meticulous hands were better used preserving law than obeying cruelty. When the last seal was pressed, the neutral elders who had doubted the widow's challenge stood and bowed without prompting. By first thaw, Ilara labored in the South Solar with Nessa and 2 midwives, while Marcus paced the corridor until Torin finally shoved a cup of water into his hand and ordered him to drink before he fainted from devotion. The child arrived strong-lunged and furious at the cold, a daughter with dark hair and a grip that closed around Ilara's finger like a vow. At dusk, wrapped in wolf-soft blankets, Ilara carried her daughter onto the high balcony above Ironhold Courtyard. Marcus stood at her shoulder, one arm around both of them, his mark visible at his collar, hers warm at her throat. Below, wolves from Duskwalker, Ironhold, Stonebank, Red Hollow, and Grey Fen filled the flagstones in ordered ranks. Torches lifted, heads bowed, first to Ilara, then to Marcus, then to the infant heir held between them under the law her mother had written. No one called her property. No one called her leverage. When the courtyard rose from the bow, it rose to 2 rulers and 1 future, bound not by purchase but by chosen oath, witnessed moon, and peace that could finally hold.